already joined us on the platform right now, but we will allow for a few more minutes to let the remainder of our guests join in. For those of you who just joined us, we will give it a few more minutes for the remainder of the participants to also access the platform before we start today's webinar. So at maybe 5:05 or 4:05, depending where you are in the region, we will start the webinar. Okay, let's get us going for the webinar this afternoon. First of all, a good morning to everybody joining us from the Netherlands, and a good afternoon for everybody who joins this webinar for Southeast Asia. Our webinar topic today is titled The COVID-19 Impact on IP Protection in Southeast Asia. And this webinar this afternoon is brought to you by the Dutch Cham, the Dutch Business Network Indonesia, the Dutch Business Association in Vietnam, the Dutch Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines, the Malaysia Dutch Business Council, and the Netherlands Thai Chamber of Commerce, all of whom are partners of the Dutch ASEAN Chamber Network, and our partner, the Southeast Asia IPR SME Helpdesk. And my name is Mitchell Smolders, and I am the Executive Director of the Dutch Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines. And I am speaking here today on behalf of the ASEAN-Dutch Chamber Network. I will also be today's webinar moderator. Joining me shortly will be Franck Fougere, external expert of the Southeast Asia IPR SME Helpdesk, as well as Marta Bettinazzi, IP Business Advisor of the Helpdesk. And before we hear from both of them, I want to make sure that all of you are comfortable in using GoToWebinar platform and especially also how to ask us your questions. So during this webinar, we are hoping for your active participation, and we would really appreciate it if you get in touch with us by typing in your questions or any comments that you might have in the question box on your screen. We'll be answering all of your questions at the end of today's webinar when the Q&A session will be held, but you can already send them to us throughout the expert presentation. As this will be an interactive webinar, we also encourage you to really make use of the discussion that we will have today. And for that, we have also incorporated several poll questions, which we will be launching throughout the presentation. Finally, also keep in mind that we are recording today's webinar, and this will be available for download as well as for viewing on the webinar section of the Helpdesk's website. And please anticipate it in a few days from now. So as I already mentioned, I will be joined by Franck Fougere, external expert for the Southeast Asia IPR SME Helpdesk. And from his location in Bangkok, we will hear more on the IP challenges in the region anno 2020. But before we give the floor to first Marta and then Franck, let's quickly go through today's agenda. I will really briefly introduce the ASEAN Dutch Chamber Network to all of the participants here today. Then we will ask Marta to introduce the Helpdesk for those of you who aren't familiar with it. And then we jump into the core presentation, followed by the Q&A session at the end. So the ASEAN-Dutch Chamber Network. I have mentioned our founding partners already, but here with a brief overview of the 6 Dutch business organizations active in Southeast Asia that are participating in the ASEAN-Dutch Chamber Network, ADCN. And over the last few months, members of these organizations have seen increasingly more activity coming from us, and we are committed to continue providing Dutch business activity in these 6 countries with more information catered to the region as a whole. This is in the hopes that we as chambers, councils, associations, or business networks can then provide added value and support when your business is expanding in one or multiple of these 6 ASEAN countries that are represented here today. And please do reach out to your local Dutch business organization if you would like more information on this topic specifically. And without any further ado, I would like to hand over the microphone to Marta to introduce you to the IPR Helpdesk project specifically.
Thank you, Mitchell. I'm Marta Bettinazzi, and I am the IPR business advisor of the Southeast Asia IPR SME Helpdesk, which is a EU-funded project which aims to help small and medium business that wants to do business in Southeast Asia or are already present in the region to deal with their intellectual property. We do this via a number of services. The most important one is the direct inquiry helpline, which means that every company, every SME from Europe can write to us and will receive an answer in 3 working days with all the information that we can provide. On top of this, we also organize numerous activities on-site and online, of course now mostly, if not exclusively online, training, workshop. You can find on our website also e-learning modules if you want to go into a more basic and yet structured kind of class, so to say. But we also have constant updates through our website, newsletter, and other channel of news. And finally, we are doing we have publications on every country in Southeast Asia, and those are constantly updated. And also we have cross-cutting issues publications. So if you are in a specific sector, maybe you want to have an overview about what's going on in Asia in the ASEAN regarding that specific topic on IP. So this is us, and as Mitchell already said, the webinar will be recorded and it will be uploaded to our website, and also the PPT will be made available for all of us. And if you have further questions that for whatever reason come into your mind after the webinar, you can always write to us. But for the moment, you can write it in the panel down below. So with this, I think it's all for our services. Let me introduce our speaker today with the next slide. Okay. Mitchell, can you change the slide? Okay. Okay. So thank you, Mitchell. So our speaker today is Mr. Franck Fougere, and he is the founder and managing partner of Ananda Intellectual Property. And he just ranked among the top 3 IP practice in 2020 for Thailand. He has practiced intellectual property in Asia, Thailand, and China for 18 years. His practice areas include trademark, patent prosecution, trademark strategy, patent litigation, counterfeit strategy, and IP contracts. Franck is a frequent speaker on cutting-edge IP issues at professional symposium and conference, and a regular lecturer for the WIPO, for the World Intellectual Property Organization. He is a former president of the Franco-Thai Chamber of Commerce and was appointed in 2015 foreign trade advisor of Franck, and in 2019 chairman of the EuroCham IPR working group in Thailand, and is also one of our experts for Thailand, and we are always happy to work with him. So I will leave the floor to Franck to start his presentation.
Thank you very much, Michel and Marta. Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar organized by the ASEAN-Dutch Chamber Network in the Philippines and the Southeast Asia IPR SME Helpdesk. My name is Franck Fougere. I am the director of Ananda Intellectual Property, a top-tier intellectual property boutique law firm with offices in Thailand and Hong Kong. Please kindly note that my presentation will contain some personal views and which may not reflect the views of Ananda Intellectual Property and of our clients. Our topic today is the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on intellectual property protection in Southeast Asia. I will present first some of the immediate impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on IP protection. I will then discuss some of the anticipated impact, risk, and opportunities of this current crisis. I will then conclude my presentation with some tips and recommendations which IP right owners may want to take away. Last but not least, as mentioned by Michel, you will have the opportunity to ask questions during and at the end of my presentation, and I look forward to answering these. So let's start. So where are we now? First of all, we can say that the COVID-19 crisis is far from being over, as you all know. It is a multifold crisis. It's of course a health crisis, but also an economic crisis, a societal crisis, and increasingly in some countries it becomes a political crisis as well. What is changing fundamentally is our Weltanschauung, or so to speak, our view of life. And we don't know yet truly how to adapt. We can see that the world as we knew it before, the human interaction, the way we used to work in the office, which has changed from working to home, the way we purchase products, where we used to go to the supermarket, where food is now being delivered to our home by messengers, the lockdowns and the restrictions to travel, all of these are completely changing the way we are seeing the world today. We focus more on health, on environment. We care about the freedom, maybe because we are partly deprived of it. We care about privacy. We are very sensitive on fake news and scams that we see online because we rely on this information, and we are spending a lot of time trying to understand how the current situation is impacting us. And for now, we are in the middle of this crisis. We are feeling distress, and we have maybe what I consider a feeling of grief. We are not yet maybe ready to abandon the world as we knew it before, yet we know the world will not be the same. So we are at a juncture, and this is a crisis in the true sense of it. If we look at the country forecast, the economy forecast for Southeast Asia, we can see with the regular updates of the World Bank that the situation has actually been worsening since February, and that currently the economic outcast for countries of Southeast Asia, with very few exceptions, being Laos and Myanmar, as well as Vietnam, all countries are impacted, and we will not see a return to growth before maybe 2022. Even the perspective of growth in 2021 are negative in most countries of Southeast Asia. And again, these are only predictions which may significantly worsen if the crisis continues. So when we talk about crisis, it's good to remember the meaning of crisis. So for the Greeks, crisis is a separating a power of distinguishing. So it's the moment where you make a decision or you have to make a choice. And I like also the Chinese word for crisis, which is weiji, which is literally translated as a danger at the point of juncture. It is composed of two characters, which the Westerners and motivational speakers like to use in their presentation. The first one means danger. The second one means opportunity. And with this etymology and this meaning of the word, I want to focus this presentation on looking at the immediate impacts, the anticipated impact of the crisis regarding intellectual property protection in Southeast Asia. I will say some words about the risk as well as the opportunities that this crisis, I think, contains for intellectual property owners. So first of all, I would like to start with a poll question to all of you. The question is the following: is the COVID-19 already impacting the protection of your intellectual property? I would like you to vote. A window will open shortly where you will have the possibility to vote, and you can choose between three answers: yes, absolutely, no, or if you are not sure, please click I am not sure. You will have 1 minute to complete this quick poll, so please go ahead, and then we will look at the results shortly.
Thank you, Franck. So please, I invite again all the participants to vote through the system. And we give you more or less 1 minute, and then we will be back to comment on the results. Okay, you still have a couple of seconds to make up your mind, and I think we can close the poll and show the results. So is the COVID-19 already impacting the protection of your intellectual property? I would say there is slightly majority for yes, absolutely. And decent part that says that is not sure. So Franck, do you want to comment?
No, I think it's interesting, and I wanted to have a feel of how many of you feel that the crisis is impacting the protection of their IP, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to discuss in the Q&A at the end of this presentation. Maybe the percentage will change after I show what the possible impacts are, and then maybe some of the people who responded no will change their opinion. It's quite interesting to see that the majority of people think that this will have an impact, and the ones who are not sure as well. But if possible, it would be interesting to hear as well from those who responded no, why they feel this crisis does not have impact on their IP. So let me continue now with the presentation.
Yeah, please.
So let's talk first about the immediate impact on IP protection in Southeast Asia of this COVID-19 crisis. First of all, we can see, and this is a general trend, that in times of economic recession, we always see a slowdown in the number of trademarks and patent applications. It was already the case in 2009, where we saw that the number of patent applications, for example, were down by 4%. If we look now at the statistics beginning of this year, and we try to project what we have seen already happening with the top IP offices, of course, China being one of them, we can see that already the number of patent application has decreased by more than 5%. And on this topic, we expect to see a sharper decline, probably between 10 and 20% less applications being filed in 2020. So that would be quite unprecedented. That will be a significant reduction in the number of applications. If we look at one country in Southeast Asia, which is Thailand, we can totally see that for patents, design, petty patents, trademarks, and copyrights, I have highlighted in red the number of applications. So when it's in red, it means that it has decreased compared to last year. So we are comparing, January 2019 with January 2020, and we can see that we are, for most of these IP rights, in a reduction of 10 to 20%. Sometimes even up to 1/3 reduction in the number of applications, and this trend is something noticeable across most countries worldwide and in Southeast Asia. I wouldn't say that Southeast Asia is more impacted than other regions. I think the whole world will be impacted here. So what we can say is that probably the crisis will have a stronger impact for small and medium-sized companies and startups, in particular those who were waiting to raise funds before filing their intellectual property and who have difficulties today in finding investors into their project. Large groups tend to try to save cost. However, they would have already budgeted the maintenance fee or the filing fees for the patent, so they will be less likely to change their long-term strategy when it comes to IP, and they may not choose to reduce by 20% the number of their application because they see the benefit of continuous filing of their intellectual property. What we are starting to see is, for some IP owners, a shift from to cheaper forms of protection. Patents for inventions, for example, can be quite costly if applied in many countries. So this is why, for example, in some Southeast Asian countries, we see a bigger drop in the number of filings for patent for inventions, but less for design or for petty patents, which are comparatively cheaper and faster to obtain. We can explain also the decrease in the number of IP applications by the fact that a lot of brands, a lot of companies have had to delay the launch of new products, and therefore they have also postponed the filing of some of their IP rights, in particular patents or trademark. There are also some companies who have difficulties, possibly that are confronted with difficulties in paying the fees to maintain their IP protection. It's no surprise that some companies are more affected than others, for example, airline companies or tourism related businesses, while some other industries are less impacted. I'm thinking in particular of a pharmaceutical company or companies, IT companies, streaming companies and the like. Of course, this trend of fewer IP applications is counterbalanced by COVID-19 trademarks. I will say a few words on these, and also new inventions. As you know, inventions are technical solutions to technical problems. Confronted with a new problem that is the COVID-19, of course, we see a lot of innovation and we see a lot of new patent applications in particular being filed to answer the problems caused by COVID-19. Necessity is the mother of invention. A second trend is, of course, as you probably have noticed, the challenge that the COVID-19 crisis have created when it comes to access to intellectual property offices, courts, law firms, notary public, and so on. So these, of course, were quite disrupted, in particular in Southeast Asia. Remember that Southeast Asian countries were among the first countries to be concerned by the COVID-19 crisis before it became a worldwide issue. Of course, it has been quite challenging for IP owners to keep track of all the lockdowns and all the postponements of deadlines, in particular for filing their IP rights due to some IP offices being closed or partially closed, or some deadlines being postponed. There has been several initiatives, and I want to say here sincere thanks to WIPO for having come up with a very useful tool, which is called COVID-19 Policy Tracker, which is designed to help IP applicants to know how the various IP offices are responding to the COVID-19 situation. And of course, the Southeast Asia IPR SME Helpdesk has been also making publications, including one recently, which you can find under the link provided. So to all of you who are listening to this presentation, I invite you to look and to click under this link. You will find a lot of very useful information. To summarize the situation across all intellectual property offices in Southeast Asia, we can say that today most of these offices are now back to operating as normal, and that they were quite fast to respond to the crisis by either extending deadlines for applicants to either file their applications or to answer to office action, objections, and so on. So the challenge here was that, of course, as the crisis did not occur on the same day in all countries, the deadlines were different, and there was no harmonization regionally regarding the deadline. Some countries had different rules. For example, in Thailand, the Thailand Department of Intellectual Property issued regulations that you must provide evidence that you were unable to respond, for example, to an office action within a deadline, and you can preserve the deadline, but only if you have valid grounds to do so. Other countries, for example, in Singapore, have been, I think, very smart in simply extending the deadlines and making available online filing, which is very advanced. I know Singapore is clearly a role model for other countries in Southeast Asia when it comes to their online portal. Some smaller countries have also relied quite extensively on online filing. So what this crisis actually showed is the need for Southeast Asian intellectual property office to embrace digitalization and to ensure that they have modern tools to allow online filing of application. Of course, the situation was more challenging for the courts. So in most countries, hearings were postponed. Some courts in some Southeast Asian countries choose to hold online hearings. And we can clearly see that in a COVID world, it would be very difficult in practice to have hearings being held online. While this might work for certain type of dispute, for example, trademark disputes, where you can compare trademarks, based on the printed documents or on a screen, it would be very impractical when it is needed to analyze physical evidence, for example, in patent infringement cases. Another issue is, of course, that in most countries, litigation allow the possibility for cross-examination and witness. Clearly, during the crisis, witnesses were unable to attend hearings. Foreign witnesses were unable to travel, and so postponements of hearings has had the effect of increasing the litigation cost for parties and possibly created prejudices as well. Serious problems as well regarding notarization or legalization of documents. Both intellectual property offices and courts require for evidences or documents or power of attorneys to be notarized and legalized, and sometimes these requirements can be almost impossible in a situation, in a COVID-19 situations where notary publics are closed or when people are prevented from leaving their home. So overall, I think this crisis has told us that some changes need to be made, maybe some rules need to be simplified, and clearly more harmonizations and less cumbersome rules are needed, in particular when it comes to notarization and legalization. Regarding the impact on the legal profession, we can say that the COVID-19 has permanently transformed our profession. First, because we have had to work from home for several months, and that has created, of course, a lot of needs to upgrade our IT system, and so did the courts and the IP offices to make sure that the information remains confidential. And we have now we have been working by video conference with our clients for several months, and this is something that is likely to become a new normal, so to speak. A third impact, of course, has been the rise in counterfeiting, and I'm sure you have seen a lot of news articles. Of course, the factors are very clear. In a lockdown situation, it's very difficult for the police or for the custom officers to inspect the products. And while some types of counterfeits have disappeared, for example, the hand carry by plane of international passengers, most of the counterfeit goods are being transported, shipped by containers, and the containers have not decreased much, only maybe 20%. So there still have been a lot of counterfeit products being shipped in Southeast Asia. Counterfeiters have, of course, understood the advantage that they could have from shipping their fake products here during this time. As an example, we have had a lot of cases in the southern part of Thailand for counterfeit products. And when custom officers seize products, we have 24 hours to investigate and make sure the products are counterfeit so that the containers are seized. It was, of course, impossible for us to travel and to confirm, and fake products were released and were sent to other Southeast Asian countries. Of course, also during this COVID-19, we've seen a lot of fake products being offered online and a lot of COVID-related products. In a situation of shortage of masks, for example, or sanitary products, counterfeiters have been very quick in offering online all kinds of products, including scams, treat or COVID testing kits, which were made available on e-commerce platform, or spam emails sent, with a lot of these purchases being made available online. This created some serious issues, and most countries in Southeast Asia have reported seizures of counterfeit products. For example, in Thailand, hundreds of thousands of counterfeit products were seized. I would like to say a word also on the Interpol Panji 13 cases in March of this year, where 121 persons were arrested for selling fake medical products, including, of course, fake mask, gel, test kits, and so on. And here are some examples of Thailand, where you can see the number of medical masks, thermometers, COVID-19 test kits seized. The same in Malaysia, where the police busted the ring producing fake COVID-19 test results a few days ago, and also in Vietnam, where the police seized surgical mask and sanitizer. The fourth trend of COVID-19 is, as I said, necessity is the mother of all invention, and we have seen interesting COVID-19 inventions as well as COVID-19 related trademark applications. So here are some examples. Of course, the handles that you can bring yourself to open door or to push your caddy. Some inventions in the ASEAN, such as the Farmer at 4.0, and even some inventions a little bit funnier to keep social distancing, such as this swimming device that have been mounted on hats for people to keep social distancing in Germany. And of course, a lot of pharma-related inventions or patent inventions that are being filed. Another phenomenon less frequent in Southeast Asia, but that has been observed in Europe and in the US, as well as in China, the number of Corona or COVID-19 related trademark here, with the intent of these applicants, to serve on the traffic and the attractiveness of the name. A fifth impact has been how the brands have tried to adapt to the COVID-19 situation, to deliver the message, for example, to their consumers to keep social distance. So I'm sure you have seen the brands advertising with new logos. Here are the example of Volkswagen, Audi, MasterCard, McDonald's, IKEA, Guinness as well, or Nike. So these brands have been, very, very fast in seizing the opportunity to reposition their brand, to keep their customers engaged, and deliver the message that customers need to keep social distance, stay at home, or help flatten the curve. Of course, some brands have done this fairly well, although some have been criticized for spending money on advertising and redesigning the logo. And some people have been asking, is that all these brands can do? Some brands have been criticizing also for trying to obtain information about their customers. For example, some brands who were distributing masks in the exchange of their customers registering with them online. So this has been good and bad. Of course, some brands are struggling more than others. You all know the Corona beer and tourism brand Carnival Cruise, or Thai Airways, which I'm sure you have heard has filed for bankruptcy a few weeks ago. So let's talk now about some of the anticipated impact that the COVID-19 crisis will have, and some risk and opportunities. I think first of all, we can say that this crisis is opening a whole new world for inventions and innovations. So every crisis, as I said, has its opportunity. And here clearly, customers will be looking for new products, safe products, products that will protect the health of the users, which be more friendly for the environment. And we clearly will see a lot of inventions and innovations that would not have occurred without the COVID-19 situation. A very strong trend as well will be the digitalization and the rise of online sales. Consumers have changed during the crisis. We can see consumers having now fully embraced online purchase, and this will likely be something to stay even when normal activity will resume. People will now trust more the online selling platforms, and they will be ordering more products, including food, online. Another anticipated impact is, of course, that brand owners and IP owners in general will try to be more flexible and will try to decrease maybe their exposure to crises such as the COVID-19 crisis. So for example, brand owners may be tempted to license or to franchise their intellectual property rights more after the crisis, so that the burden is not just on them, but that the economic risk may be shared with other operators. So having less employees, making more use of digital tools, and licensing and franchising IP are trends that are likely to occur in order to reduce in order to reduce risk and gain more flexibility. The fourth trend clearly will be some modernizations. The crisis has revealed, in particular in Southeast Asia, that some IP offices need to embrace efficient and effective e-filing system, allowing for the filing online of intellectual property rights, trademarks, patents, design, copyright, but also online payment system for official fees, and also the need for these IP offices to develop more solid IT infrastructures. In some less advanced countries in Southeast Asia, and I'm here not talking about Singapore, we could see that some of these offices challenged when their trademark or patent officers and examiners had to work from home. Clearly, they were not able to function as well as when they were open. And we heard from many IP applicants that they also struggle to apply for the trademark rights because the online system was not reliable or was not available. So I think this will push these IP offices to now quickly develop a solid, robust e-filing system. A fifth trend that I see possible, and that is because of the impact on courts. For contracts, we might see more arbitration and more mediation of out-of-court settlement. Clearly, if you have a possibility to avoid court obstacles through arbitration or mediation, and if you're experiencing problems right now, you may want to consider including arbitration provision or try to settle out of court any disputes that you have. A sixth trend, I think, will be the push for consumers to ask for more security online when making purchase. They want to make sure they are purchasing quality products and not counterfeit goods. And here we can expect a tighter online enforcement, in particular, more cooperation between IPR owners and internet service providers. In several countries in Southeast Asia, there are new laws being adopted or regulations to increase the liability of internet service providers and to push these ISPs to work more closely with intellectual property right owners by entering, for example, in MOUs in the same spirit as the MOUs existing in Europe. And overall, I think this crisis will result in better internet governance with issues such as fake news, scams, online counterfeiting being addressed. And of course, we'll have to be careful here that these changes do not restrict freedom of speech, but that are useful also to combat and protect consumers, in particular against products that are making claims online that they can treat or prevent COVID, as we have seen. A seventh trend is, I think this is in particular for patent owners, the increased risk to see compulsory licensing being imposed in some countries. Clearly, in a force majeure situation such as the one that we are experiencing, when the drug or when the drugs or vaccines will be available, it will be particularly difficult for this drug, even if they are patented. It will be difficult for patent owner to justify that royalties need to be paid or they would have a monopoly to produce this cure. So some companies with some products have already anticipated this risk, and some companies have promised royalty-free licenses or have entered into deals with generic drug manufacturers so as to ensure that they will be able to produce and distribute the drugs if required. This has not been the case though for all companies, and there has been several litigations, in particular in the US and in Europe, of some pharmaceutical companies being accused of trying to protect their monopoly. I think overall we need to remember that patents are here to reward innovation, and we are probably very happy that there are some patented drugs that may work to help us combat the COVID-19 situation, such as potentially the remdesivir. However, we also understand the need for limitation and flexibilities to allow the people to access this medicine if it's efficient. And so we, in the line of the TRIPS and the national legislation on patents which allow for some flexibility, it is likely that some products will be offered as if they would be under compulsory licensing or royalty-free. Another anticipated thing is, of course, the priority that some countries have already been giving to COVID-19 innovations. And here I would like to invite you to look at the fast-track patent grant procedures, which are available in several countries worldwide. And in Southeast Asia, you can look, for example, at the Singapore patent fast-track system, which can allow some applicants up to 10 requests per year to obtain a granted patent within a very short period of time of 6 months from filing to grant. Again, this is very much appreciated from an IP owner point of view, because it is important for these innovations to be granted patent protection and to be examined quickly. And we certainly want to see a lot of inventions, in particular inventions that will help resolving this crisis as soon as possible. Another thing to look for is, of course, the impact of the CPTPP, which is the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. As you may know, some countries have already signed this treaty, and under these agreements, we will see possibly some patent extension terms, in particular, in case the patent examination has taken more time than it should. So we might see patent terms extensions over the 20 years period. Before I go now to my conclusion, I would like to ask the second poll question, which is: how likely will you adapt your intellectual property protection strategies in a post-COVID-19 world? Very likely, you will not change, or you are not sure. You have 1 minute to vote. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Franck. The poll has been opened, so I invite all the attendees to vote now. And we give you 1 minute, as Franck said, and we will resume to comment the results.
All right, so I think...
yeah, we can close the poll. And we see that there is a very strong majority for answer A, sorry. So how likely will you adapt your intellectual property protection strategy in a post-COVID world? So at least you managed to persuade them that they have to do something. That's a good result, I would say.
Maybe I don't want to be pretentious in thinking I'm changing people's mind, but certainly I will move now to the last part of my presentations and talk about some recommendations maybe and some impact on the strategy that some of you may consider. So here are some recommendations that I would like to make in particular to intellectual property right owners in a COVID-19 world or in a post-COVID-19 world. Again, the crisis is far from being over, and these are just some recommendations we can make now. My first recommendations to IP owners will be to perform an audit of their IP protection. And the reason for doing so is to see whether the protection that they have is currently in line with their needs, and in particular, if they are not paying more than they should for their IP. You heard that a lot of the obstacles, for example, in monitoring the various deadlines and various responses of IP offices to the crisis, the extension of deadlines, well, this all becomes much more easier when you have an international right, such as, for example, a Madrid trademark application. So if you have an international trademark, it's much easier to manage your rights. And it might also be cheaper. As you know, the Madrid system is now available in Southeast Asia. And for those of you who may still have a lot of national applications or a mix of national and international application, it is probably the right time to see and to look how you can rationalize and strategize your protection with the aim of reducing costs. Switching your multiple national applications into an international application can be a good way to start. Another thing you need to look at is, of course, is it worth keeping or renewing all of these applications? Do I need to keep my current scope of protection? We sometimes see a lot of trademarks that are just being renewed for a lot of products and services where actually these trademarks are not being used, and therefore you might be overpaying for maintaining your trademark protection. An audit should also aim at identifying which intellectual property assets you need to keep based on their value. A lot of time IP owners focus on the trademark. However, sometimes it is not the trademark that is really the most important asset. It might actually be the formula or the design of the patent that makes the sale. And therefore, it is important here to always keep in mind that what's important to protect are the most valuable assets. The second recommendation is, of course, to check whether your protection is still accurate, still adequate in a COVID or post-COVID world. For example, how is your brand protected for e-commerce activities? Do you have a vulnerability here, or what are your risks? A lot of time, managing the brand for an offline business is very different than managing a trademark online. There are a lot of opportunities online, and clearly the COVID situation has shown that some companies were able to shift quickly from an offline distribution system, in shopping malls, and suddenly, being able to offer their products online. So while this creates a lot of opportunities, in particular to reach to new customers, you also need to be aware that the managing of a brand online is something very different. And there are opportunities, but you also need to know your vulnerabilities. So look at the opportunities that you may have online. Look also at the opportunities that you may have within your companies to innovate. Again, in any crisis, there is an opportunity to change, to create new products and new innovation. Here's the example of a signage company that we work for. They were just producing signs, billboards, advertising, and they asked us to file in many countries in Europe and in Asia, design patent applications for a gel dispenser that can be activated by the foot, as you can see, and they filed several design applications, and they are selling a lot of these products. So in a situation where their business is severely impacted by the crisis, they actually were able quickly to use the raw material and a little bit of ingenuity to be able to sell products and actually making good profits in a situation like today. Here are some recommendations to IPR owners. Be knowledgeable, be resilient, be flexible, and be creative. Be knowledgeable. Do not forget that you have the possibility to learn. And in fact, a lot of people have taken the time that they were spending at home to become very knowledgeable and to think what they would like to do with their business, or they are actually spending more time on watching their competitors. How are their competitors responding to the crisis? Are they more impacted or less impacted? So this is a good time to benchmark, to look at your competitors, to look at the technology and their innovations. A lot of information is available, as you know, in patent databases, and it is a good time to look at what your competitors are doing. Also, consider, for those who are suffering from infringement of their intellectual property online, that counterfeiters are also facing a difficult time right now, and that they have moved also to sell more fake products online. And in doing so, they are not as careful as they used to be in the offline world. So we are actually currently gathering a lot of information for our clients, because the counterfeiters are not able to rely on the parallel economy that they used to operate, and with a lot of intermediaries, and now they are posting, they're desperate to sell their counterfeit products. So we have counterfeiters not being very familiar with how to remain anonymous online, that are offering fake products directly being connected to either the manufacturer or to the warehouse. And therefore, right now we are gathering a lot of very interesting information on these counterfeiters being less careful, because they are moving also into a new world, which is the online world of selling their products. Remember, if you innovate, do not disclose too quickly your invention. Remember that these might be protectable under patents or design patent, and for that they need to be new. So be careful not to disclose too quickly. Take advantage, of course, of the laws, and in particular the possibility that you may have under certain laws to obtain patent extension in case the examination of your patent has been delayed, or also, as I mentioned, the patent accelerated procedure, such as the one in Singapore. And last but not least, take the time now to learn how to manage your brand online, and in particular on how to enforce your rights online. Be resilient. Again, this is typical for intellectual property right owners. Intellectual property is a right that is granted for a long period of time. You know, patents are for 20 years, trademarks are protected for 10 years to be renewed. So IP strategies are usually long-term strategies. You know, it takes time to register IP rights. It takes an investment, and the investment is not lost after just 2 or 3 months of a crisis such as the one we are going through. Intellectual property rights are assets that can be used, in particular in difficult time. So remember that actually these assets can be quite stable. They remain value. They can be licensed. They can be franchised. The goodwill that is accumulated on the brand will remain. And so when the economic situation improves, of course, it is important that the goodwill of the trademark has been preserved, and it will allow you to be strong again. Remain flexible. I think here this is a key message, and we've seen successful companies, shifting productions. For example, perfume companies such as LVMH suddenly starting to produce gel instead of perfume, or automotive companies producing ventilators, textile companies making masks. So you may want to ask yourself this question, what can we do with the know-how that we have, and what kind of products can we deliver, what kind of new services can we propose to our consumers, and potentially what kind of deals can we also secure with third parties. Remember that IP is an asset, and you can use that in a creative way. For example, doing co-branding or licensing your IP. So my last recommendation is, of course, to remain and to be creative. Again, there is a lot of opportunity in the current situation to develop new products and services, and understanding how the needs of consumers will change is very important. And clearly, customers will be eager to discover new products. We know already that some things will change. If you think of the design of the cabin in airplane or restaurants, tables, buffet, and a lot of new products will come out of this crisis, some which have not been invented yet. So how do you repurpose some of your products? Some companies have done so. If you think of the snorkeling mask of Decathlon, for example, that has been used as a ventilator. Some other brands have already thought about co-branding their brands with a more health dimension, again, to attract more consumers. Some other companies are currently thinking to license more their intellectual property, again, to diversify and reduce the risk. Some companies also have adopted an open source approach, which I remind you what it is. So it's to offer access to the technology and to the patents in particular, so as to grow an ecosystem of other companies that will then be more inclined to use the technologies. So I would like to conclude and answer your questions and hear from you as well. What I would like to say in conclusion is that intellectual property is not the problem. It's clearly the solution in the situation that we are going through. What is helping us today are all the inventions, innovations, the medicines, and all of these that have been patented. If you think about the N95 masks that you are using, these are patents of a company called 3M. The gloves, the hand sanitizers, and so on. The situation we have now, which is a crisis situation, will be much worse without these inventions, without these innovations that are protected. And I want to be optimistic, and I think that we'll see a lot of very interesting inventions and products coming up. So with this, I would like to conclude my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Franck, for tackling this ambitious topic with us today. And also thank you for the audience for staying on, even as we have gone slightly past the expected time for this webinar. I would ask you to stay with us for a few more minutes during the Q&A session. We already received several questions, but in case you still have not sent in yours, please do so now. Franck, the first question we received tackles the topic of security against IP infringement, especially related to transactions online. Would you have a few words on this topic?
Yes, I think online sales are both a great opportunity and a challenge. Of course, we see a need for more security online. I think the discussion has already been engaged with a lot of internet service providers, online platforms, the Lazada, Shopee, Alibaba, Amazon, eBay, and the like. Clearly, we want to see this marketplace being clean so that consumers feel confident that they are buying real products and not counterfeit goods. And it's even more important in for countries that may have shortage of some products. I think we've seen a lot of counterfeit goods such as masks or gels or test kits being offered online because these products were not available in stores, and this is why customers turn to these online platforms or try to get these products online. And we certainly want to make sure that people have access to that. But of course, as you know, there is no cure yet for this disease. So everything that is being sold online saying that it can cure is a fake. It's a scam.
Okay, thank you for these clarifications. Of course, we also know that a lot of our members are experiencing difficulties during these times. There's wide-scale talks on an economic downturn across the region. How should companies take into account budget limitations in relation to the prioritization of their IP? Should they prioritize this over other segments of their business, or what is your advice for them specifically?
Well, I think it really depends on each company's strategy. I think generally intellectual property is a long-term benefit. You do not just apply for a trademark for a limited period of time, and increasingly you don't file intellectual property just to protect yourself. You actually want to use intellectual property as an asset and as something that can bring a return on investment. So clearly you don't want to suddenly stop all the expenses that you have, in particular if your IP has been an expensive investment that you've made over time. What you may want to see is, do I need that much protection in the long run, or do I need to reprioritize my IP needs? For example, we sometimes have clients who file their trademarks in many classes of products or services because they just want to prevent other person from using the name in classes of products and services that they are not using. Yet at the same time today, they are developing new products. So I would suggest to this company, drop the classes where you're not going to use the trademark, because in any case, your trademark may be challenged for non-use, but rather protect the new products or services where you are now starting to use your brand. So it's more of a reprioritization of your needs that is needed. And if you can do so and save cost at the same time, of course, that is perfect.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And next question we received relates to the anticipated impacts that you have described in your presentation. Which of these are already in progress to be put in place? And the question specifically targets the Philippines, but I think also for the wider region, this is very relevant.
Yes, well, I think Philippines has been impacted like all other Southeast Asian countries, a little bit stronger, in fact, than some others. But the situation is not over. We can still see COVID-19 cases rising in some countries like Indonesia. I don't know exactly how the situation is evolving in the Philippines, but same issues. Counterfeit products being made available online, disruption when it comes to law firms, notary public, courts, IP offices being able to serve intellectual property right owners. I think these comments I've made today in my presentations are applicable to all countries.
Okay, thank you very much. And now this is, I know, a question that is very dependent on the situation, but a question that we received relates to the cost of registration. Where can our members best access more information on this, or what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so here I think, you know, the WIPO website is a very good source of information if you want to estimate the cost for an international trademark application, for example. So you can Google the Madrid calculator. Madrid calculator is a web page provided by WIPO, which allows you to calculate the amount of official fees that you would have to pay, partly to WIPO and partly to individual national trademark offices. And this simulators allows you to, you know, get a feel of how much it will cost to protect your trademark internationally. Of course, take also some time to understand the rules applicable to file an international trademark application. You need to be a national from a country member of the Madrid system, of the international trademark system. And you also need to have a basic trademark application. In other words, a national trademark application in the country of origin, so in the country where you do business or you are national from, so that you can then apply for an international trademark. So all the information is available on WIPO website. All the official fees, certainly. Lawyer fees, I think, for an international trademark designating many countries are usually under 1,000 USD. The more countries you include, of course, the more expensive it gets. Know that there is no regional system yet for trademark application in Southeast Asia. However, if you are a European company or European applicant, you should be aware that still exists a very cost-effective regional system, which is called the European trademark, where you can protect your trademark in all 28, soon 27 countries of the European Union.
Okay, very clear. I was asking this question because it did not specify in the original question whether it was a trademark indeed or a patent, and also not which jurisdiction, which of course will influence the cost, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, for patents, you also have an international patent system called the PCT, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, also managed by WIPO. So you can find a lot of information on the WIPO website. And the PCT basically allows you to postpone a lot of the costs that you would have for filing national patents in each country. So you can postpone this cost up to 30 months, generally speaking. And again, this is a very efficient way to know also about the patentability of your invention, because during the time you have applied for an international patent application, you will receive an international search report, which will contain information regarding the novelty, the inventive step, and the industrial applicability of your inventions. So before you spend a lot of money in filing your patents in many countries worldwide, you can file an international patent application, receive the international search report, and then look whether this invention has a chance to be accepted, it is patentable or not, and then raise the funds required for an international patent protection.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank, for answering all of our questions. Eyeing the time for this afternoon, I think we will move on to the concluding part of this webinar. In case you have further questions about IP protection, of course, always feel free to reach out to the Southeast Asia IPR SME help desk, and they can give you a tailored response also to anything you need to know on this topic. Now, if we can go to the next slide, we would like to highlight the ASEAN event coming up next week, where we are targeting the sector specifically on tourism. I'll wait for the slide.
Mitchell, I made you the presenter, so now you can take control.
Yes, thank you very much, Marta. So next week, Monday, 29 June, exact same time as we are doing now, we are being joined by some of our colleagues in the region, and this webinar is led by Dutch Business Network Indonesia on the topic of the future of tourism specifically. The future of travel after COVID-19. And we are joined here by Roland Coppens, General Manager of Southeast Asia and Oceania for Air France KLM, Menno Stockman, Director of CELTH, and Jasper Helsinga, Program Manager for CELTH. In case you would like to join us next week, please register through your chamber, your local chamber, and find out more about ADCN activities there. Marta, for you?
Yes, thank you, Mitchell. Also from the IPR SME Helpdesk, we have upcoming activities all online, so accessible for free to everyone. The next appointment is just in 2 days. That will be again on the impact of the pandemic, but it will be not just focusing on Southeast Asia, but it will also including some reflection about China. And on the 3rd of July, we are going to have our second in the history of the Helpdesk webinar on Myanmar that will focus on the counterfeit and brand protection during COVID-19, and in general on the situation of Myanmar that, as many of you maybe know, don't have an IP office yet. So it's an interesting question: how do you register your IP when there is no IP office to do so? It's a good question. So with this, we finish, we conclude our webinar, and let me thank again all the participants for being here, and I hope you will keep in touch with us. And I want to thank Mitchell for moderating and Franck for the very insightful presentation, very, very interesting, and thank you all again.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you everybody for joining us also.
So goodbye, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.